All we've got to do now is to start pumping.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Fully Inflated Football Podcast. I am your host, Marcus Whitman. Thank you, everybody, for your patience, your love, your support while I was off the last couple of weeks, getting married, off on the honeymoon, celebrating Christmas. Content has been slow over the last couple of weeks, but we're back, bigger and better than ever. We have an amazing show ahead that I cannot wait to share with you guys. We're going to be doing, for the first time this season, my quarterback rankings. We did my quarterback tiers several months ago, but I was a little bit more cautious. Didn't necessarily rank them 1 through 30 plus or whatever, was more grouping those guys into clusters. Here I'm actually going to put my foot down a little bit more as we are now basically through this entire season and actually rank these guys 1 through, about 45 names here we're going to get through here. So we're going to do that. And then another highly requested topic, we are going to be doing kind of the coaching carousel conversation. Who's going to be fired? Who might get fired? Who are the top candidates? And who would be the best fits for those openings? And then we'll get into the Patreon mailbag. So a really fun, full episode of the podcast here. If you're watching this on YouTube, please do hit that like button. If you are listening to the audio version, please leave a review. I think I saw you can now leave reviews on Spotify, so please do that. Would really help me out and grow this podcast as we get into the new year here. And also tell a friend about the show. This show is also brought to you by my Patreon, my amazing supporters there, my patrons on patreon.com/ThatFranchiseGuy. You'll get the ultimate triple threat there. You can get access to submit questions to this show through the mailbag. You'll get exclusive content, things like film breakdowns, week-to-week picks. You'll also get tons of draft content as the NFL draft is about to pick up, and you'll support my channel in the process. So that is patreon.com/ThatFranchiseGuy. This show, this channel would not exist without all of you amazing Patreon supporters. So thank you to everyone who has signed up recently, and for those of you considering signing up. And let's go ahead and get started with my quarterback tier conversation. But before I actually rank these guys in order and show the names here, I wanted to describe my thoughts on what each tier specifically means. Just as I start talking about this, it'll be good to kind of lay the groundworks for that so you're on the same page with how I view these guys. So at the top you have elite quarterbacks, which I wrote capable of sustaining top-tier performance regardless of surrounding cast in multiple seasons, multiple consecutive seasons, keyword there. Consistently uses elite-level quarterbacking traits to elevate an offense by forcing defenses to play left-handed and by elevating teammates. So that's the elite tier. Then you have borderline elite, quarterbacks that are capable of using elite-level quarterbacking traits to elevate an offense, but do not always do so at a consistent level, whether it be within a season or from year to year. Then you have great quarterbacks. Great quarterbacks also have the traits to elevate an offense and are what most would consider a surefire franchise quarterback. But these quarterbacks are too inconsistent on a week-to-week basis to be considered elite. Then you have good quarterbacks. These are guys capable of high-level games, but are often highly inconsistent or overly dependent on surrounding cast. These quarterbacks can often lack elite-level traits at the position, and quarterbacks in this tier are either highly talented young players or purgatory quarterbacks who often leave franchises stuck in the middle as far as if this guy is enough to win a Super Bowl. So if you're in the great tier or higher, you feel pretty good that this is a guy you can win a Super Bowl with. Good and below, you're either questioning it or still looking. Then we have the starting caliber tier. And in the past, I've split these guys up into like high volatility starting caliber guys, low volatility starting caliber guys, prospect starting caliber guys. I just put them all in the same tier so I can actually rank them more clearly here. But just know some guys in this tier will be more veteran types, which I wrote with not enough good quarterbacks to fill out 32 teams. These are the veteran quarterbacks capable of playing like one of the 32 best quarterbacks in the NFL, but are either too old, lack the traits, or are too inconsistent to be considered a viable long-term solution. And then also in this starting caliber tier, you have the prospects who are starting caliber players. But these are young prospects who are in the development process but have not shown enough to be considered good or above quarterbacks. They start because of upside, but whether they are one of the 32 best quarterbacks in the league at this point in time is up for debate. So just to clarify, that's what the starting caliber tier is going to be. Then we have the solid backup tier, not someone a team should feel good about starting for a full season, but is a player capable of winning games in the NFL in a pinch with the right system, surroundings, and game plan. Then we have prospects, who are a young player with traits who does not have the pedigree of what we consider a starting caliber prospect. These players have appeal, but are not considered to have appeal as a solidified starter for the future until further notice. So, for example, a player that will be in that tier is a guy like a Tyler Huntley. Then below prospect, we have trash, and harsh term. I don't actually think these quarterbacks are literal trash. If any of these guys happen to be watching this show, nothing personal, just a buzzword. You guys get it at that point. But let's start there with the trash tier. And I only included 3 guys here because there are dozens and dozens of names that are below solid backup, below prospect. But there's 3 guys that I ended up putting in here that I think might surprise some people. So I have Drew Lock. I don't think he's a solid backup, and I don't think he's a prospect at this point. And by the way, of all the guys on this list, Drew Lock is the very bottom. We are officially counting up within tier from the way you're looking at this. If you're watching the video format, from right to left is counting up. So Drew Lock at the very bottom here. Again, I don't think he's a prospect. He hasn't shown the development by year 3 that you need to see from a guy that is considered a raw traitsy quarterback. He still needs to see receivers come open before he pulls the trigger. He doesn't process defenses. His pocket presence, can look good at times because he likes to move and extend plays, but he doesn't actually manipulate the pocket and utilize the pocket as well as he should. Like, he will just check his first read and run. So Drew Lock, I'm officially done with. And the difference between him and, say, Jeff Driscoll, who Broncos fans had to watch last year, who would be another example of a quarterback in the trash tier, it's minuscule at this point. So Drew Lock is in this tier. Then I have Taysom Hill, who I'm also done with. This is Sean Payton's pet project of a quarterback. Ultimately, what this comes down to is he looks like any of these former collegiate quarterbacks that play receiver or tight end. He looks like what any of those guys would if you plugged him in at quarterback. He's sheltered occasionally by Sean Payton's elite play calling, but he's inaccurate. He has no ability to process defenses. His pocket presence is non-existent. Very similar to like Drew Lock. So I don't understand the contracts that he's getting. I've said in the past, you can't convince me that these 2 massive, 8-9 digit contracts that he's getting, you can't convince me that that's not some way the Saints are manipulating the salary cap in the ways that they do, and they just have this under the table agreement in some way that I don't understand. But Taysom Hill should not be playing quarterback in the NFL based on the film I've watched. And then the third guy here is going to trigger a lot of people, and it's Cam Newton. And this one needs to be explained a little bit, because it's not that I don't think Cam Newton is a solid backup, because that's where just on the field I would rank him. But I do think he's unrosterable at this point in time, because when you have Cam Newton on your team, I do think there is a certain expectation about him that he's going to start, and you can't have Cam Newton as your starting quarterback in 2021. He's probably the 3rd best quarterback on his own team right now, behind Sam Darnold and PJ Walker. He has some good things about him as a quarterback. He is good in the quick game, and he adds value as a runner, but he can't throw the ball deep. There's 3+ years of evidence of that at this point. He's turning the ball over, and he almost never actually uses his athleticism to extend plays, which is super frustrating. He is what I call a catapult quarterback. He takes the snap and he's flat-footed in the pocket. He doesn't sense pressure. He doesn't use his great athleticism. It's similar to things I've said about, say, like Marcus Mariota. The deal with Cam Newton is I think with his ego, with his resume, there is a certain expectation that he's going to start. And that's why I think he's unrosterable. So he's a very unique situation here. But I'm just done with Cam Newton. I'm done with all these Cam Newton stands that still stand by him and think he can still play at a starting caliber level. We just have enough evidence going back to 2018 that that's just not true. He's not a good enough quarterback to sustain success in this league. So he's going to surprise some people that I have him in the trash tier. But again, a lot of that is because of expectations and ego. Then we have the prospect tier. I'm going to rip through these guys pretty quick because we just don't have a lot of evidence on these guys. But these are young players with traits that appeal me, but just guys that don't have a good enough pedigree to be considered long-term answers, as I said. So Jacob Eason, PJ Walker, Josh Rosen, Kellen Mond, Dwayne Haskins, who does intrigue me as a potential compete for a starting job next year for Pittsburgh. I was really impressed with him, making the Steelers roster in the first place. I thought he looked a lot better than Mason Rudolph, who is a quarterback that would be in the trash tier. I think he has a chance. Former first-round pick, Pittsburgh, a great culture for him, and a good scheme, by the way, because Haskins has that sort of pocket passer mentality, good for like a spread West Coast style offense that Pittsburgh has always run under Big Ben. And I'm intrigued by Dwayne Haskins. Kyle Trask, who the more I watch, the less I hate him. I've always compared him to Nick Foles, which I think holds some truth, but he has a confident processor. He can read defenses. He's relatively accurate. His arm isn't as strong as you would hope for a big guy, and he's not very athletic. But learning from Tom Brady, I'm kind of intrigued. I think it's a good scheme fit there in Tampa. Then we have Davis Mills, rookie out of Stanford, starting to show some intriguing things. I think you don't feel good about him as a starter, but he's certainly surprised. He has some traits. There were things I liked about him coming out of Stanford. I remember I put him on my top 10 quarterbacks list before really anybody talked about him, and people were hating me for it. And then all of a sudden, he was in first round conversations. I was like, whoa, he's not that good. But he has traits. He's got a good arm. He's athletic. Seems to be a good worker. So again, prospect. We'll see where it goes. And then Tyler Huntley, who's really come onto the scene. You got some questions about his deep ball placement, but for the most part, he looks like a solid potential low-end starting caliber guy. He extends plays really well. He's good in the quick game. You can use him in the design run game. His arm is fine. He's got kind of a wacky release, which you can get by with if you're comfortable with it. And he's a good decision maker as well. So I'm intrigued by Tyler Huntley, as I think a lot of teams around the league are. Okay, then we get into the solid backup tier. Another one I want to kind of rip through because this one's pretty self-explanatory. Mitch Trubisky, I think you can use as a designed runner. He can do some stuff. I think he's a career backup at this point, so that's why I put him in this tier, even though he's young. Case Keenum, Colt McCoy played well for the Cardinals. Joe Flacco, Jacoby Brissett, Sam Darnold. Same thing with kind of Mitch Trubisky. Now, you might be asking, why is Darnold in here? Why is Trubisky in here, but Drew Lock's in the trash tier? I just think Darnold and Trubisky have put better tape out there and have more traits that can make them a solid backup than Drew Lock. If Drew Lock's in there, I don't even think he's giving you a great chance to win, whereas Trubisky and Darnold, I think, can do some stuff to put you in that position. So that explains that a little bit. And then Nick Foles, Tyrod Taylor, Marcus Mariota, I think 5 years ago you would put him in the veteran starting caliber tier, but I just think there's a deeper pool of talent at this point where a guy that doesn't have a strong arm, he doesn't use his feet to extend plays as much as he should, a bit of a timid passer. I think he's much closer to a Tyrod Taylor or an Andy Dalton or a Nick Foles than he is to, say, Jared Goff, who will be coming up. And then Andy Dalton, Now, there's another quarterback that is in my starting caliber tier here that we'll get to in a second in Gardner Minshew. And I was looking at Minshew and Dalton. I'm like, these guys are super similar, right? Not strong-armed guys, a little bit of mobility, but not fast, good decision makers, or at least good processors. But the difference to me between Gardner Minshew, who I'll just talk about now as we move on to the starting caliber tier, the difference between Gardner Minshew and Andy Dalton is Dalton, unfortunately, has actually started to throw a lot of interceptions. And if you're going to be a Minshew and Alex Smith and Andy Dalton game manager type, I really need to see you avoid mistakes because you're not creating big plays. So if you're turning the ball over, you're really hurting your team. And unfortunately with Dalton, who I think is still a decent backup and a borderline starter, the turnovers at this point, it's just very frustrating. So that's the difference between, say, Minshew and Dalton. But Minshew's actually going to rank ahead of 7 more players here. So I'm jumping the gun a little bit there, but it was just a convenient time to talk about it. So now into our starting caliber tier, which mixes, again, veterans and prospects together. The bottom of this tier for me is Justin Fields. And, he's got the upside, right? There's a reason people are excited about him. And he's not like a Drew Lock or a Sam Darnold being like a backup caliber prospect because Justin Fields is really accurate with the football, which is a huge trait that he has above some of those other guys. But unfortunately with Fields as well, like a lot of my questions about him coming out of Ohio State, things that led to me making him my 4th quarterback in last year's draft class, have really surfaced in the NFL. He holds on the ball way too long. He's not a quick processor, and he will make mistakes. He has like a crazy amount of turnover-worthy plays based on the amount of dropbacks he has this season. His turnover-worthy play percentage is one of the highest in the league. So those issues that I had with him at Ohio State, unfortunately, have shown back up in the NFL. But one thing I will say about Fields is he's really not in a good scheme for his skill set. The Matt Nagy offense, I've said this before, there's a reason their offense has moved better with guys like Dalton and Nick Foles in there because the Matt Nagy offense is that spread coast, quick-hitting passing game type where it's all about make a quick decision, get rid of the ball, and we're going to put our receivers and our running backs in position to create good run after catch. And Justin Fields is not that type of passer. Justin Fields wants to hold the ball. He wants to look for big plays. Andy's just not at a point in his career where he can identify coverages quickly. So for me, this ties into what our next segment's going to be as far as like coaching moves and coaching changes. I want to see Fields with a coordinator that unlocks the deep ball, maybe a Brian Dable, which he's totally utilized Josh Allen's strengths, which are similar to a Justin Fields in the deep ball part of the game, or more of a Kyle Shanahan style offense where they're leaning into his mobility and scheming open, easy first reads, which is something Fields would really benefit from right now. So a bit of it is he does have these strong weaknesses, but another thing is like he maybe couldn't be in a worse scheme for his skill set. So that's just a note on Justin Fields. And then we have Jordan Love, who I do rank ahead of Fields. It's had a little more time to develop in the league. And I had a higher grade on Jordan Love coming out than I did on Justin Fields. I think his processing is underrated, especially compared to a Justin Fields. And his pocket presence to me is very natural compared to a Justin Fields. But they are very tight. There's a reason I put them next to each other, and that's going to be a heated debate because you got the two potential future quarterbacks of the NFC North right there. But Jordan Love is going to get a lot of crap because of his start against the Kansas City Chiefs. And I made a film breakdown of that game. That was a extremely high difficulty game. His offensive line completely shit the bed in that game. We went through the all-22 of every single play. There were not a lot of easy opportunities for him with open receivers. And frankly, we've now seen a lot of evidence that the Chiefs defense, which played a great game in that game against the Packers, we've seen a lot of evidence that Chiefs defense is a lot better than we've seen in the first half of the season. They're actually pretty damn good, and that might have been the awakening of that defense. So he's going to get a lot of crap for that Chiefs game. For some reason, people really have it out for Jordan Love. I don't. I thought he was underrated in the draft. This is my own opinion. If you're watching the show, you want to hear my opinion, so that's what it is. I think Jordan Love is still a really intriguing prospect, and on most teams would be starting like a Fields, like a Lawrence, or a lot of these other young quarterbacks. Just happens to be on the team with Aaron Rodgers. And then I've got Trey Lance, who this is a little bit more of a leap of faith here. Again, just kind of an opinion. You can certainly reorder those guys in a different way. They're incredibly tight, such small sample sizes from all these guys. But I think what he brings as a runner, I think his arm talent is superior to both of those guys with Love and Fields behind him. And we might get to see him this week with Jimmy Garoppolo maybe out. Again, a bit of a leap of faith. If you want to put him a little lower, I totally understand. I'm not going to die on that hill. These orderings will surely change, especially as we get to our next two here. We actually have Trevor Lawrence next and then Zach Wilson. I'm not making any pound the table statements on who I'd rather have. I just think with Zach Wilson, you've seen a little bit more development as the season's gone on, as he got healthy and it has come back. Whereas Trevor Lawrence has just continued to be stagnant, hasn't thrown a touchdown since Halloween, which at this point is like 2 months ago. He's making mistakes. He's not reading defenses any better than Zach Wilson. And Zach Wilson, of course, makes mistakes as well. I think Wilson, you maybe get just a little bit more like improvisation in there. So those five right there, these rankings are going to change, man. Some of these guys might drop down. Some of these guys are going to climb, surely. So just at this point in time, not a lot of evidence. But none of these guys are really top 32 quarterbacks in the NFL right now, in my opinion. They're just talented prospects with a ton of upside that just have a lot of growing to do. And that's why I have next Ryan Fitzpatrick and Taylor Heineke and Gardner Minshew, all kind of like more established veteran types. So Ryan Fitzpatrick's a fun story. I don't know if we ever see him play again. 39 years old. Not going to bet against him, but based on what we know, if he was healthy, he was pretty solid for a Miami team that was decrepit last year. Had a lot of expectations to come in for Washington and be a starting caliber guy for them. Had started to kind of weed out a lot of the turnover-worthy play stuff that he had shown throughout his career. Had turned into a guy with good processing. And it's too bad he got hurt. But I do think Ryan Fitzpatrick better than some of those prospects at this point in time. Then Taylor Heineke, right above Ryan Fitzpatrick. It's pretty crazy that Taylor Heineke has come in and been pretty much what Ryan Fitzpatrick is, a guy with a ton of aggressiveness, that kind of gunslinger mentality, pretty solid like extending plays. The only reason I put Heineke above Fitzpatrick is he's a little faster. He's actually a lot faster. So I think that added mobility makes him a little more effective and a little more consistent. And then Gardner Minshew, as we mentioned, we talked about him with Dalton. This is going to trigger some Jags fans having him above a guy like Trevor Lawrence. But let's face it, Gardner Minshew is shown to be a better quarterback than Trevor Lawrence. And he's shown to be a better quarterback than those other five prospects, being Fields, Love, Lance, Lawrence, and Zach Wilson. He had a better rookie season than any of those guys. He, last year for the Jaguars, was good until they benched him because he was going to win them too many games, which is something they're not worried about with Trevor Lawrence getting them the number one pick again. And his start this year for the Eagles was really good. I don't understand why he's not a starter in the NFL, why more teams weren't interested in adding him to be their starter this season. Philadelphia gave him a look. I think it was a great move, and he needs to get another look. I don't think he's a high upside player by any stretch of the imagination, but I do think he's one of the 32 best quarterbacks in the NFL right now. And then Tua, above Gardner Minshew. Tua, I really struggled. I didn't know necessarily what to do with him because I wouldn't take Tua above any of those five prospects that we mentioned. Fields, Love, Lance, Lawrence, and I don't know why I can't rattle off Lawrence and Wilson, but I wouldn't take Tua above any of those guys. He just doesn't have the upside of those players from a talent perspective. And he sure as hell hasn't, shown the processing and consistency to say he's, projects as a long-term answer at quarterback. that's why I kind of have him. He's in this mix of like starting caliber veteran and prospect. He's one of the more unique players to rank here. Man, on one hand, he's done some nice stuff, especially these last couple weeks, but he's on a 7-game winning streak. Not all thanks to him. His defense has been incredible. But he makes a few really nice plays every game that help put his team in position to win. They've found what he does really well, which is the RPO game, where he can hit some really nice tight window throws, and he can use his athleticism to dodge sacks and extend plays. Like, he's not a complete waste at this point in time. He's also a guy that turns the ball over a ton and seems to really labor to like throw the ball on difficult throws. Even not just like the down the field stuff where he just clearly doesn't have the arm talent, but also like throwing to the sidelines, like across the field. Like, the ball just hangs there, and it's no wonder he throws a lot of interceptions. Because he just, sometimes his eyes are bigger than his stomach, if that makes sense. From a, he thinks he can make throws that he just can't. Sorry, I got to turn the vibrate on my phone off. Group chat's blowing up. So yeah, Tua is a tough guy to know what to do with. I do think right now he's probably a better quarterback than all the guys we've just talked about. I think he's going to stay about where he is, though. I don't see him ascending too much higher. I think his ceiling is like a Jimmy Garoppolo, for example, a guy that is just capable of good games and capable of having really big stinkers where he can't elevate his team and he turns the ball over. So that's where I'm at with Tua. And then I have Jalen Hurts, his college teammate, right above him. Another interesting quarterback. He's very matchup dependent right now. Zone-heavy teams have really given him fits. He's very much a first-read quarterback. He's gonna, he can deliver in the passing game when things are working. But when they're not, he's going to scramble. He's going to run around and try to make plays, which can work some games and won't work other games. He's got physical talent. You can really lean into what he does as a runner, which will elevate the offense in certain ways. But he's another guy that I don't see him ascending into the good, great, and beyond tier. So tough guys to rank. Then I have Big Ben. He's on the downward trajectory here. Still a starting caliber guy, but pretty self-explanatory with Big Ben. We've all kind of seen where he's at right now. Just the physical limitations are too much. And then Jared Goff, kind of Big Ben-esque as far as his career trajectory. He's trending down towards the sort of Gardner Minshew, Ryan Fitzpatrick, Andy Dalton category of fringe starters. Still a really good, underrated arm. I think if he had better receivers in Detroit, you'd maybe see him playing a little bit better. You almost certainly would. But I don't think any team is going to be viewing Jared Goff as the future at quarterback anytime soon. Jameis Winston, pretty high here. So we're now, I think, Jameis comes in here. Let's just count it out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. So 23rd here. Jameis Winston. Pretty high. I've been really impressed with what we saw from Jameis. The thing with him has always been like the Jameis plays, right? Everybody compares a quarterback that makes bad mistakes to Jameis Winston. And they're still there, don't get me wrong, but the rate at which they were there for New Orleans this year was about a third of the amount. And then you got some really impressive throws. He leaned into that New Orleans system. And I think Sean Payton really did a good job kind of getting his mitts, his coaching on Jameis. He's only 28, 29 years old, former number 1 overall pick, a lot of physical talent, great leader, hard worker. I still believe in Jameis. He's almost a prospect here is what's crazy. I think if nothing else, you're getting a high volatility, like good veteran solid veteran starter. But there's actually like some upside for Jameis to keep ascending and be more of like a top 20 guy. So I'm intrigued to see what happens with him. I imagine he'll be back with New Orleans next year, just because from his perspective, I think that's the best career move for the Saints. That might be the best they can do. But there might be teams that want to throw a lot of money at Jameis as well. He's a very unique spot there, as is Baker Mayfield. So we got a lot of tough conversations in this group with Baker Mayfield coming up, who is just just sliding downhill as fast as you can imagine. Coming out of the draft, I called Baker Mayfield Case Keenum with a stronger arm. I almost immediately apologized for that take, and now we're sitting here 4 years later, and it's kind of holding up. I didn't think it was a good pick at the time. He's had some good moments, though, and he's had moments of proving my statement of him being Case Keenum with a stronger arm. He's had plenty of moments of making me look foolish for that. So I'm not like trying to take a victory lap or anything, but where he's at right now, he's a fringe starting caliber guy. He straight up cost his team the game against the Green Bay Packers. Another thing with Baker is it feels like every single time the game is on the line lately, he just disappoints to tremendous proportions. Whether it's an inability to make that big scramble or hit that throw down the sideline in a tight window. I know he's playing hurt, but it's been the decision-making stuff. It's been the questionable pocket presence, the lack of physical traits. What do you do with Baker Mayfield? And I don't think the answer is make him your franchise quarterback. I think that's very clear at this point. I do think he's probably back with Cleveland next year. Get him a better receiving situation, get him back to full health, and he could respond. His arm is much stronger than he's shown this season. Again, I'm not trying to take a victory lap on the Case Keenum with a stronger arm thing. Difficult to know how much is injury this season. But we've seen him throw the ball with much better velocity in years past, which I think maybe next year we see him reascend. But coming into this year, I thought he would establish himself as more of a top 10 quarterback, and it has completely gone the other way. So Baker's in the kind of starting caliber prospect / veteran group right now with guys like Tua and Hurts. And then Teddy Bridgewater, I actually put above all these guys because it sounds weird to say, but we think of Teddy Bridgewater as like Alex Smith, as like this game manager type, week to week, very stable, but doesn't make a lot of big plays. You know, Teddy's been the opposite this year. He's actually had a few games this year. Dallas comes to mind. There's been a few other games. He's been like within certain weeks like a top 5 quarterback where he's extending plays. Some weeks like he gets in these grooves where his pocket presence is elite and like his ability to elude sacks and keep his eyes downfield and hit difficult throws down the sidelines over the middle of the field. There's weeks where you're like, wow, with Teddy Bridgewater. And then there's weeks where he's like, can't see the field, taking bad sacks, missing throws, incredibly inconsistent. So that's why I put him with like Baker and Jameis. Like, there's been weeks where I've been really impressed by Teddy Bridgewater. And you see what he did with Carolina last year as well. Looking back on that was impressive, right? Like, they can't get anything from Cam Newton, Sam Darnold, P.J. Walker. Teddy Bridgewater thrived in Carolina last year with very similar circumstances. So I think he's maybe even underrated at this point. I don't think he's like the future for anybody. I don't think you feel good about winning a Super Bowl with Teddy Bridgewater. Just a high volatility guy that's, I think, just inaccurately classified by most people as like this Alex Smith type of passer. That really has not been Teddy Bridgewater now for a while. Okay, now we're getting into good quarterbacks. Daniel Jones, to me, is at the bottom of this tier, which might surprise some people. I think most people would probably put him in the, Tua, Jalen Hurts grouping. You look at what that Giants offense has been without Daniel Jones, I think it highlights some stuff. Their play calling, as every Giants fan would tell you, is some of the worst in the league. I agree. But it's also the offensive line's a colossal disaster. The receiving core looks good on paper, but really isn't anything special. Yet Daniel Jones steps in there. He plays on time. He uses his legs to create first downs. And he's developed. He has really cut out the amount of fumbles and interceptions that he contributes. And I think that's enough to say he is ascending to be a Kirk Cousins style, Jimmy Garoppolo maybe. That's kind of the spectrum with Daniel Jones. Need a little bit more evidence before we say that, assuredly. But that's just, I think, where Daniel Jones is heading. I don't think he's the answer. I think the Giants would be smart to avoid giving him a long-term contract and using their draft capital to put them in a position for a higher upside quarterback. But I think Daniel Jones deserves some credit that he has not really received for his play over the last couple of years. Jimmy Garoppolo is next. And this video comes at a bad time for Jimmy Garoppolo. He did not play well against the Tennessee Titans. I think it was 3 or 4 turnover-worthy plays that really cost his team the game against Tennessee. But you look at his play over the last 2 or 3 months, his body of work on the season, a guy that's been to a Super Bowl, that played solid in that season. He's a good quarterback. He's not quite as good as Tannehill or Cousins, but he's a starting caliber player very clearly, a notch above that. I think he does some things really well. I like his pocket presence. I like his ability to kind of play point guard, the quick release, ability to kind of read defenses quickly. He's good in the short game. He can make big throws down the field. He just has 2 explicitly defining weaknesses. He will spray throws randomly. Like, he has some of the worst accuracy issues in the league, where it'll just come out of nowhere. He's got an open receiver over the middle, and he sails it 10 feet over his head, and it gets picked by the free safety. It's an issue. He also is one of the worst quarterbacks in the league at seeing underneath defenders. He will consistently throw bad interceptions to linebackers and lurking safeties. So because of those weaknesses, you'll get really big stinker games in there. But he's also capable of 3 or 4 game stretches like we've seen really in the extended period of December, where he plays pretty solid football. So Jimmy Garoppolo gets pretty unfairly criticized. Don't want to overreact to a bad game last week because I think there's more good games to come. I really want to see Jimmy go because he's obviously going to be on the move. I would love to see him go to, say, Pittsburgh is like the one spot that I really think he could succeed, where they have playmakers, they have a good defense to support him, and a scheme that frankly fits him better than Kyle Shanahan's play-action heavy, push the ball downfield passing game, or at least scheme open deep receivers. I think at a scheme like Pittsburgh, Jimmy could stay as a top 20 quarterback and compete for a Super Bowl with Pittsburgh. If they can get back to elite defense, of course, and improve that offensive line. Then I have Mac Jones, very Jimmy Garoppolo-esque right now. New England very clearly has a type. I think they saw a lot of Jimmy Garoppolo in Mac Jones. I think Mac Jones is very clearly more accurate than Jimmy Garoppolo. Not quite as experienced as Jimmy, but I think the accuracy gives him the nod. I think his pocket presence, similar to Jimmy Garoppolo, is very much slept on. He's very good at navigating pressure and extending plays when he needs to. And he's been the best rookie quarterback. He had the highest impact grade from me. I'm not terribly surprised that he stepped in and looked like a 5-year vet. I thought he was a Kirk Cousins comp coming out, and he's very much been that for New England. I mean, they're in the Super Bowl conversation with a rookie quarterback, which is very impressive. Matt Ryan, he's just dropped off so much physically, which has led to a lot more inconsistency from him. In years past, I would have put him more in the great tier, but very clearly missing Julio Jones, his go-to guy in tough situations. He doesn't have that same rapport with like Kyle Pitts, for example. And he just isn't bringing a lot to the table other than a ton of experience and ability to operate an offense quickly. So I think he's in the good tier, but he's officially dropped below a lot of other quarterbacks that I previously ranked above Matt Ryan. Then Carson Wentz. And I think it's fair to say the Colts won that trade, looking like a first-round pick. I think that's actually guaranteed to be a first-round pick at this point. But, you know, a pick in the 20s for a solid quarterback for a team that is very much ready to win, I think that's a win. And I think with Carson Wentz, he's done a much better job of playing in structure, playing on time. His accuracy has significantly improved from where it was in Philadelphia for the last couple of years, which was really bad. And the nice thing about Carson Wentz, as opposed to kind of these last 4 quarterbacks and even some of these other guys in this tier, is I think with his mobility and his arm talent, that, by the way, seems to have dropped off a little bit. His arm talent, at least. But we've got a track record of Carson Wentz like really taking the Eagles out of holes, leading comebacks, big third down plays, abilities to really elevate the offense when they need him to. Now, he hasn't had to do that for the Colts because of their style of play, but I think it's kind of in their back pocket. And there's going to be some opportunities, I think, for Carson Wentz as we get into playoff football, if they can make it. And I know he's on the COVID list right now, but if they can make it, I think there's going to be opportunities for Carson Wentz to kind of continue to ascend. I think he's had a good season. He's had inconsistencies, don't get me wrong. It's been like 3 or 4 games this year where he's tried to lose the game for his team. But you can say that about every quarterback in this tier. That's why they're in the good tier, right? They have inconsistent weeks, and that's been Carson Wentz. And that transitions well to our next 3. Kirk Cousins, let's count this out. Is he still 16th? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Okay, he's 15th. But Kirk Cousins is the new Andy Dalton line, right? Very dependent on the players around him, giving him open looks, pass protection. He's not a guy that extends plays. He will have really bad weeks when defenses put pressure on him and don't give him easy looks. And he'll have really good weeks when things are there and there's opportunities for him to have big games. He is the definition of an average quarterback and the definition of a guy that you just don't feel good about getting 4 straight high-level weeks from him to win a Super Bowl. Ryan Tannehill, very similar. I think he brings a little bit more from an athleticism standpoint, but I still wish he used his legs a little more. We talked about Cam Newton being a catapult passer, where he's going to take his drop, pick his fit, and fire the ball. That's Ryan Tannehill. He has so much more potential to sense pressure better and extend plays and not rely so much on A.J. Brown contested catches over the middle on 3rd and 8, 3rd and 9. Because there's a lot of times watching Tannehill in those big moments where I'm left underwhelmed. He's having a good season, like relatively speaking, but he's also had some really big stinkers in there. Straight up lost his team the game against the Texans with 7 turnover-worthy plays, maybe the worst quarterback performance of the season from anybody, but a good quarterback, capable of winning Super Bowl with the right things around you. Derek Carr, same thing. Now, Carr, to me, has been the most impressive because with Cousins, Tannehill, and Carr, these guys are very tightly knit, in my opinion. But Carr, to me, has offered the most out-of-structure consistency this season. He's had a little bit more of that it factor in those big moments. Still a guy that can play a little timid at times, but again, this year he's been a little bit of a different version of himself, and that's why I put him at the top. I don't think I'm ready to say he's a great quarterback because I need a little bit more sample size there, but overall, I would say the Raiders' offense has shattered expectations almost exclusively thanks to Derek Carr. And that is the definition of like a great quarterback. I just don't have enough sample size of him being this guy, if that makes sense. So he's at the top of the good tier. I think if you wanted to sneak him in at the very back end of this great tier coming up, I would understand it. That's just not what I would do. Okay, now we're getting into spicy territory. So we have now, 5, 7, 12 quarterbacks left. So my number 12 ranked quarterback in the NFL is Matthew Stafford, who has been disappointing, I think, over the second half of the season. And it's been, I hate to keep using the word consistent and inconsistent, but there's just been weeks where Matthew Stafford's like a bottom 10 quarterback this year. His lows have really stunk it up this year. He tried to lose the game against the Vikings. He did lose his team the game against the Titans. Just stupid mistakes that shouldn't be made. The accuracy has been hit or miss for him. There's moments where he has guys screaming up and down the field and he short arms it. Sometimes they get picked. Sometimes they just fall into the dirt. And he was not good against the Packers, for example. I would be concerned with Matthew Stafford that come playoff time, he's not going to give you 4 straight weeks of great play. But the difference between Stafford and all those good quarterbacks we just detailed, other than maybe Derek Carr, and maybe I'm talking myself into Carr, Stafford being a good debate, but Stafford's highs are really, really high, MVP caliber stuff. We've seen it in Detroit for years. Like, he has games where he looks elite. His arm talent. There are games where he is just dropping dimes down the field. He does extend plays. He keeps his eyes downfield under pressure. He doesn't panic in those situations as opposed to a Kirk Cousins or a Tannehill. So there's really good stuff there with Stafford. It's just not consistent enough. So he's 12th and Russell Wilson 11th. I never thought I would do this. I have been about as big of a Russell Wilson stan as you could find. The hard truth is we don't know what Russell Wilson is right now. Because really, going back to the second half of last season where he fell apart, he went from maybe the best quarterback in the NFL for the first 8 weeks to legitimately like the 16th best quarterback. And now this year, it's been borderline ugly for a lot of the times. And I think there's a lot of reasons for it. It's not that he doesn't have, and this is the frustrating thing, it's not that he doesn't have help. I think this year he got a scheme with Shane Waldron and that Rams offense that fits his skill set perfectly. Schemes up deep shots. Their run game has struggled, but I don't think it's a play calling issue with Russ. I really don't. Maybe a little bit too run heavy, but ultimately it's not a passing concept issue. He's got playmakers. He's got a top, 3 or 5 receiving duo in the league with Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. He's got other options as well. They gave him D. Eskridge in the second round as a talented player. I know he hasn't played all season, but they've got a couple good tight ends. Like, it's not a playmaker issue. It's a Russ issue. And he's never been a guy that's like elite playing in rhythm. He's always leaned on his ability to extend plays, break the pocket, break sacks, get out of trouble, and make those beautiful plays on the move. I think he's deteriorating, physically speaking, with his legs. He's not as fast as he used to be. And I think he's really regressing hard because of that. Because you take that out of his game, the rest of Russell Wilson is an average quarterback. It just is, with elite deep ball accuracy. So right now, he's getting passed up by these young studs that are just more physically talented, that frankly, a lot of these guys are just better decision makers. And he's aging, he's regressing, he's in a slump. But I don't know if there's an easy way out of it for Russell Wilson. So I think he's much closer to Matthew Stafford than he is Rodgers and Mahomes, where we were ranking him with last year. That's for damn sure. So tough truth with Russell Wilson. I'm curious really to see what people think about that ranking right there. But then into the top 10 now, I have Justin Herbert. And Herbert and Russ and Stafford, these guys are all pretty dang close. These are quarterbacks that don't necessarily process defenses at the highest of levels, that will make mistakes in the passing game, but their highs are incredible. I mean, Justin Herbert, his arm talent is elite at the highest levels of elite. It's up there with like Josh Allen, who I do consider to have the strongest arm in the league. But Herbert, is a little different. Like, he'll hang the ball in the air and it just keeps floating, and then he drops like these bucket shots like from 70 yards away. Now, you need more to your game than that, right? And he has decent ability in the quick game. He is decent extending plays, but there's just a little bit missing with Herbert from a consistency standpoint. I think it'll come in time. He's in his second year. So I think this is a respectable ranking. I think Chargers fans will want him a little bit higher. I don't know. I just think his team and Justin Herbert himself, they're just very week to week. And I prefer some of these guys that you know a little bit more what you're getting every week, if that makes sense. And someone you know what you're getting every week is Dak Prescott, who I do rank ahead of Herbert. Almost a completely different player than Justin Herbert. Dak is every play. Bang, 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 bang. Read 1, read 2, read 3, not there. And what's really impressed me about Dak is his pocket presence has taken a next step this year. He seems so much more poised under pressure. It's not elite, but it's much better than it's been in years past. I've always, with Dak, been really skeptical that he's a Cousins, a Tannehill, where if he's under pressure, he's just going to kind of glue in on guys downfield and just kind of put it up. He isn't always doing that this year. He's been much more consistent in those situations, which has been big for him. He's got a little bit of that confident processor to him that most weeks is really going to help him. But if he goes against a defense that can take away those first couple reads, he will make mistakes and force some balls, but pretty nitpicky. I don't think he has an amazing arm. In fact, of the guys in the top 10, there's probably only one other quarterback that I would say has a weaker arm than Dak Prescott, which at times it's like there's just throws that aren't available to Dak Prescott on the move, across field, deep down the field. It limits what he can do as a passer a little bit, but Dak Prescott now in the same tier with some of these other guys as a top 10 quarterback. I feel like that's the correct spot for Dak Prescott, and hopefully that's good enough for Cowboys fans. We'll find out in the comments, I suppose. And then Lamar Jackson. And he's kind of in the same breath with like Herbert and Stafford and Russ, where week to week, right? There's a lot of inconsistencies in Lamar's game as a passer. Accuracy can show up some weeks like as an issue. Like pocket presence and knowing when and how to extend plays as a passer. Like some weeks he runs a little bit too early, and some weeks this year he's really settled in and looked comfortable, which earlier on in the year I was like, Lamar Jackson's been unlocked as an elite quarterback, and then he kind of went back to his old self. It's just the inconsistency as a passer. Again, I hate to reuse that term, but week to week it's just a little bit unsure of what you're getting from Lamar. Now, obviously, what he adds as a runner is truly unique, but I think the amount of weeks where he just comes out and is just a stinker of a passer keeps him out of the elite or borderline elite conversation for me right now. And there's still a name left that's going to cause some stir here, and it's a player that I have been pounding the table for a long time that I think is finally playing out as we get into the borderline elite category. My number 7 quarterback, Joe Burrow, which is actually about where I've ranked him all year. But I think he's finally getting recognized for all of the things he does so well. Everybody's known that he's this ultra competitor, right? But what have I always said about Joe Burrow? Aaron Rodgers from the waist down, Tom Brady from the waist up. And it's played out this year. Seriously, in year 2, this kid has a top 5 processor in the league. He just understands what defenses are doing. He understands his scheme. He makes checks at the line of scrimmage. Yes, as a young player, he will be wrong, which is why he throws more interceptions than like a Herbert or some of these other guys that are younger. But I'm okay with that because he makes so many other amazing plays. I think he has the second or third highest percentage of big-time throws of any quarterback. That's more than Josh Allen, Aaron Rodgers, Brady, Mahomes. He makes amazing plays. He's not just this nickel and dime quarterback. He extends plays. That's the Aaron Rodgers from the waist down part of his game. He has that elite eye in the back of his head. He keeps his eyes downfield. He pushes the ball downfield on third down. The only knock on Joe Burrow is he doesn't have a great arm. He has the worst arm talent of any of these quarterbacks in the top 10. I do think he's improved it a little bit, just as Dak Prescott has, just as a young Tom Brady did. There's things he can do with his mechanics and strength training to improve that arm talent, which I think he's done, but it's always going to hold him back a little bit. But I got crap when I said Joe Burrow is better than Dak Prescott months ago. I got crap for saying he's a top 10 quarterback. Coming into the season, I got crap for saying he's an elite quarterback, or at least in that conversation. And now he's in the MVP race. He has a Bengals team that even myself, as the biggest Joe Burrow apologist, even I didn't have them in the playoffs. He's got this team cooking and, in the mix for the Super Bowl. Like, Joe Burrow is a borderline elite quarterback. The only reason he's not elite is sample size. He's still young, arm talent potentially. And, he will throw interceptions. He will throw every couple weeks. There's a throw or two where you're like, oh, yeah, that's a dumb read. Like, bad job. But it's because of his play style that those will pop out. And I'm not really worried about it because I have so much confidence in him to continue developing his processor as time goes on. As he is today, I think he's the 7th best quarterback in the league. But if he weeds out those dumb interceptions that he throws, you're talking about a top 3 or 4 quarterback in the league. So, Joe Burrow, you guys can let me know if I'm just holding on to old takes or if this is a take surfacing. But this is what I see when I watch Joe Burrow, is a borderline elite quarterback. Then I have Kyler Murray, who I think I'm getting real close to pushing Joe Burrow above Kyler, honestly. But I also love Kyler Murray, right? I think his ability to create plays, we haven't seen it for a few weeks, unfortunately. He's really in a slump, which is, I'm trying not to have that recency bias here and remember what Kyler did last season, what he did in the first half of this season. I do think his ability to extend plays is the best in the NFL, ahead of guys like Lamar and Patrick Mahomes. Because he has the escapability of Lamar Jackson, but the downfield vision and really arm talent comparable to Mahomes. He can't throw a ball as fast as Mahomes, but just that ability to accurately throw the ball off platform, it's Rodgers-Mahomes-esque. And you pair that with a guy that has become a better processor at reading defenses, that mostly avoids mistakes as a passer. He doesn't throw a lot of interceptions. He is supremely accurate. He has improved his accuracy over the middle of the field this season, which was a problem for him last year. So he's shown development this year as well. And I'm also not convinced that Cliff Kingsbury has got him in the perfect scheme for his abilities. Oh, and then by the way, he's amazing adding value with his feet in the designed run game. So Kyler and Burrow is a tough split for me, but I will put Kyler with a slight nod over Burrow right now. And then Deshaun Watson, I think it's time we talk about Deshaun. We've kind of pushed him to the side for a long time. These legal issues, I still don't have any clarity, but I'm just going to rank him based on if he is in there, which I expect him to play next year, but who knows. Going to leave the politics and the all of the off the field stuff out of here. But as a player, I would put him 5th here. We haven't seen him play this year, so it's tough. I think there's a chance that all of this nonsense really hurts his on-field play in a weird way, whether it's confidence or preparation or expectations, whatever it may be. But as what we know about Deshaun Watson, he was an elite quarterback last season. It was his first year as a truly elite player. He's been a great player leading up to that. He does basically everything you talk about with Kyler Murray. Play extension, downfield accuracy, it factor, good, not great processing. I do miss watching Deshaun Watson, the football player, who's a truly spectacular quarterback. Just unfortunate all of the off-the-field stuff has popped up in the way it has. Then Josh Allen, borderline elite. He is the definition. If I go back to what I wrote about borderline elite, we said, you can literally just, instead of definition of borderline elite, definition of Josh Allen, is capable of using elite-level quarterbacking traits to elevate an offense by forcing defenses to play left-handed and by elevating teammates, but does not always do so at a consistent level, whether it be within a season or year to year. That's Josh Allen, right? He's laid stinkers against teams like the Jags. There's weeks where he's just not reading defenses and making mistakes. And then there's weeks like last week where the in-structure stuff is solid, but what he's able to add out of structure is as good as anybody. His ability to break sacks. I love his pocket presence. That's why I did like him coming out of Wyoming. That's just something that is going to be a weapon for any quarterback. If you have that eye in the back of your head and you're able to sense pressure and know when and how to get out of the pocket or manipulate the pocket to extend plays. That's what Josh Allen has, paired with legit speed. And to me, the best arm in the history of the NFL outside of maybe John Elway. But as far as I've ever truly watched, Josh Allen has the strongest arm I've ever seen. Just straight up like raw arm strength. And he uses it to make throws that should not be humanly possible into the smallest of windows. So you wish he was slightly more consistent so you could say he was a truly elite quarterback, but I do think borderline elite is the right spot for Josh Allen. All right, now we got the top three, the elite quarterbacks, where Tom Brady's going to be third for me, then Patrick Mahomes 2, and Aaron Rodgers 1. So Tom Brady praise is few and far between from me on this channel. You know, I don't think he's the best quarterback to ever play. I think Rodgers very clearly better career quarterback, on-field performance. Patrick Mahomes, I think, is probably at the point where his sample size is big enough to say he's a better quarterback than Tom Brady. I think Peyton Manning, very comparable. Go back to guys like Elway and Marino, maybe. But reality is you don't win 7 Super Bowls if you don't have elite traits and you're not supremely consistent from year to year. And no, he's not a great athlete. No, he doesn't have the strongest arm. But don't let that hide the fact that Tom Brady does have elite quarterbacking traits, and he has been an elite quarterback this year. Now, you got to go back to like 2017 since the last time he was. I think last year had some ups and downs, and by the time the Super Bowl hit, he was at that level. But even his Super Bowl run last year, could debate if he was elite. But this year, you're seeing the best processing we've maybe ever seen from an NFL quarterback. I mean, there's just nothing you can't throw at Tom Brady that he hasn't seen before. And it's really highlighted by the fact that he has, I need to look at the numbers, but I'm pretty sure he has the best or the lowest time to throw. Like, he gets rid of the ball quicker than anybody, but he does that while staying around the top 10 in average depth of target. Like, this stigma that Tom Brady's the check down king, it's just not true. Like, he really is pushing the ball downfield. He has some of the best accuracy doing so as well, as long as he's able to throw with his foundation, with his mechanics, where his arm talent is better than you realize in those situations. So as you look at these top elite quarterbacks, Brady, before the snap and within the first, say, 2 seconds of the snap, is the best quarterback in the NFL. The difference is, or let's just say, however, the gap between Brady in those situations and Mahomes and Rodgers in those situations is not enough to make up for all of the stuff Mahomes and Rodgers bring to the table after 2 seconds, right? If you can cover up Brady's receivers, you can beat him. He's not going to move around and buy time and allow receivers to have more time to get open. I think Brady having the receiving core he's had is supremely important to him, to have an Antonio Brown, a Chris Godwin, a Gronk who he trusts. Like, if he doesn't like what he sees, he's going to put that perfect back shoulder to Gronk. You take all that stuff away, he doesn't bring a lot to the table. But again, that doesn't mean he isn't adding stuff that other quarterbacks aren't as far as his pre-snap and immediate post-snap processing are concerned. But it's not like Mahomes and Rodgers are idiots, right? These guys, if the play's there, they'll hit it. They might not necessarily get to read 2 and 3 as quick as Brady does, but they'll get to it. And the other thing is, if 2 and 3 aren't there, as opposed to Brady just layering that jump ball to Evans or the back shoulder to Gronk, that isn't always going to work. Mahomes and Rodgers will navigate the pocket. They'll extend plays. They'll break the pocket. And they have the arm talent to make throws that just aren't available to Tom Brady. So the high-level stuff from Mahomes and Rodgers is just stuff that Tom Brady isn't capable of doing. And I don't think the gap of what Brady does with his mind is enough to make up for what Mahomes and Rodgers can do with their arms and their legs. Now, I think all these guys are elite quarterbacks. They do so many things at that elite level. I think there's a spectrum here, though, where Brady's the processor, the pocket passer. Mahomes is the improv guy, the off-script genius. And Rodgers is like the perfect combination of those two. I think Rodgers' processing isn't that far behind Tom Brady. I think it's behind it, but it's not that far behind it. And I think you get some of the Mahomesian play extension stuff from Rodgers too. So that's why I put Rodgers first. He gives you the full package. Whereas Mahomes will make mistakes and Brady can't really extend plays. There's nothing that Rodgers can't do, right? So that's why Rodgers is one. I do think Rodgers is the MVP of the NFL this season. He's been playing with a terrible offensive, well, not terrible, but a banged up offensive line that's not nearly what the Chiefs or the Bucs certainly have to work with. And really his receiving core outside of Devontae Adams is virtually a non-factor. So there's my elite group at the top there and my entire quarterback list. I'm really excited to hear what you guys think. I'm proud of this list. I believe in this list. I don't look at this and say, that's a hot take. Like, this is my genuine evaluation of these players. Some will consider some of these rankings to be hot takey. It's just what happens when you do quarterback tiers. But yeah, I'm excited to share this with you guys, and I'm going to take a little break and come back and talk about some coaching carousel stuff. So we'll see you in a second. So now we're going to do coaching carousel talk. And the way I'm going to do this, I'm going to do like my top 10 candidates for head coaching positions for next year. And then I will talk about guaranteed coach openings, possible coach openings, and then like maybe some hot seat for next year guys that I just don't think will be fired. And then I'll do the best fits for all of those teams based on my top candidates. So my top 10 head coach candidates for 2022. Number 1, Brian Daboll. I'm just always going to lean towards hiring an offensive mind, especially one in Brian Daboll that has been in the NFL for a long time. He's learned from some of the best. He's worked with Saban. He's coached from Belichick. So he's seen culture-wise, Sean McDermott as well. Culture-wise, he's seen what works in football. And he's a really sharp offensive mind. So I think he turned down a lot of offers last year, interview opportunities, knowing better options were going to come his way. And to me, he is just by far the number one candidate, especially when you look at his ability to evolve Josh Allen's game, who, before he really got time to work with Daboll, was viewed as this raw, sporadic passer. Still a little bit of that in there at times, but it is night and day in Brian Daboll's system. So Daboll to me is the number one candidate. Number 2, Matt Eberflus. If you want a defensive mind and talk about a guy that will come in and set a culture and just this expectation that everyone is there to work and be a professional, Matt Eberflus is your guy. I love his scheme. He will mix in some complicated stuff defensively, but really just gets back to the basics. They run cover 2, man. Cover 3 is really his roots, but he's evolved his scheme, which is something you want to see. And, man, he just gets his team to play fast and sturdy. And I think that's easier said than done in the NFL these days. So Matt Eberflus, the Indianapolis Colts defensive coordinator, is number 2. Number 3, Todd Bowles. Todd Bowles has done phenomenal, would be putting it lightly, what he's done with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. One of the best run defenses in the history of the NFL, but he does it with a light front and an aggressive blitz-heavy scheme that simultaneously makes things difficult on quarterbacks and opposing passing games. He was wildly successful in Arizona, went to the Jets as a head coach, flamed out, and now he's back in Tampa. I just think he is worth another shot to say, okay, the Jets, it's hard for anybody to be successful, but he's been good everywhere else. And I think the players love him. So Todd Bowles, number 3 for me. Then I have Eric Bieniemy, who's a hot name. I think he's a good candidate. I think he's qualified. He's done a great job. He seems like a really player-friendly coach that could be a culture guy. I really don't like guys that it's hard to know what they truly have brought to the table. If you're an offensive coordinator, but your head coach is an offensive mind, or likewise, if you're a defensive coordinator, but your head coach is a defensive mind, especially in Eric Bieniemy's case, where he works with Patrick Mahomes, he works with Travis Kelce, Tyreek Hill, it's just so hard to pinpoint what Eric Bieniemy, when you take him out of Kansas City, what he's going to be able to do for you. So I understand him as a candidate. I think he's a little bit more risky in that way. Whereas all these other guys, they are for sure bringing what they bring to the table for their teams to your squad. Or at least the 3 guys we named already are. Now, my next guy is in a similar conversation as what we just said with Eric Bieniemy. Nathaniel Hackett, who is the offensive coordinator for the Green Bay Packers. Now, he's appealing in large part because the Shanahan offense. We talk a lot about it on this channel. Wide zone run game, play action heavy, really good schemes for quarterbacks that need things simplified. So if your teams like Jacksonville or Chicago, and you want to make things, if you want to paint a clear picture for a young quarterback with a lot of talent, the Shanahan offense is perfect for you. And I think Nathaniel Hackett is the top candidate in that coaching tree this year. And Hackett reminds me a little bit of Kevin Stefanski, who had some of those backgrounds coming from Kubiak, but has worked under other systems as well. He was, if you remember, Blake Bortles' offensive coordinator for that Jags team that was really good. And he kind of flamed out there, but how much of that was Blake Bortles? He's come to Green Bay. Aaron Rodgers speaks volumes about this guy. He's worked under Matt LaFleur, who's an underrated head coach. He is a skyrocketing name. And if you want to implement that Shanahan offense, I think he's your guy. Number 6 is Patrick Graham, defensive coordinator for the New York Giants. Love his scheme. He might be the most innovative defensive mind in the league right now. I've talked in other videos about his unique front. He runs kind of a 3-3-5 odd front. It's worked wonders for a guy like Leonard Floyd. It leans on 3 safety packages, disguising coverages. There's a reason some quarterbacks, guys like Jalen Hurts and Russell Wilson and other young quarterbacks that just don't read zone coverages as well, have really struggled against this defense because it's really unique. And I want to make a video about this maybe over the summer. It's just something I haven't had time to do. But he's done a great job, Patrick Graham, with the Giants defense. That team's been a mess, but the one saving grace for that team in the Joe Judge era has been Patrick Graham's defense and his innovative scheme, who he comes from different backgrounds, some of it Bill Belichick, and he's really crafted his own defense. And I think over the next 5 years, we're going to see a lot of these Patrick Graham inspired defenses around the league. So he's up there. Then Jim Caldwell. And Caldwell for me is, and I should have done more research here. I can't even remember if Caldwell's an offensive guy or a defensive guy. What I do know is that he went to Detroit and totally reset the culture, and that people love this guy. And they will go to war for him. So if you want that Dan Campbell type of it's ironic we're talking about two Detroit guys here, but if you want a guy, say for Jacksonville, who's just going to come in, be a professional, put you in your place if you're out of line, encourage you if you're doing well, put some good coordinators underneath him, and just be a CEO and reset the culture, I think Jim Caldwell might be your best option. Number 8 is Luke Fickell. I'm not a huge fan of reaching for college coaches. It doesn't always work. But you take a program like Cincinnati to the college football playoff, you develop a Desmond Ridder into a pro, like a top, prospect, you crank out NFL talent out of Cincinnati, you're gonna get some attention. He has done some really good work, and I think he's kind of a aggressive move to maybe hit a home run. Luke Fickell out of Cincinnati. I don't know a lot about him because I don't follow college football super closely, but I do know that is about as good of something you can put on your resume as possible. Okay, then Dennis Allen, defensive coordinator for the New Orleans Saints. Kind of a retread. Head coach for the Raiders in 2013, 2014. But, God, he's done a good job with that Saints defense year after year after year. And in a world where it's like all zone schemes in the league for the most part, Dennis Allen wants to play man coverage and play match zone coverage. And if you have like the cornerbacks to do it, a pass rush to back them up, you could have an elite defense under Dennis Allen. And the Saints have done it for a while now. So really impressed by him. Could be worth another look. And then 10 is like Kellen Moore and company. Kellen Moore to me is like, if you want to reach for that young offensive mind, try to hit a grand slam. Kellen Moore is a great name. He's only like 33 years old. There's other guys too, like that are all kind of in that same category. Shane Steichen for the Eagles, I think has done a good job. Kevin O'Connell for the Rams, just another young, ascending Sean McVay guy. We've seen that. Marcus Brady for the Colts and Byron Leftwich for the Bucs. All these guys are under offensive-minded head coaches. Now, Kellen Moore I listed first because it's really his offense, whereas the other guys I would say are more understudies. But I think all of these guys will be in the conversation if you want an offensive-minded head coach. And then I had to say, not Doug Peterson, because there are talks about Doug Peterson getting another job. Look, I think Doug Peterson is a complete fraud. I said it last year before it was popular to say that he was the worst head coach in the NFL in 2020 because you watch the Eagles, they were unprepared, they were yelling at each other, they were underperforming, they led the league in snap to what the hell is going on plays where it was like they didn't even know the playbook. Carson Wentz fell apart. It was a disaster. Fighting with the front office, just ugly across the board. Not to mention that, you look at what they were after Frank Reich left. They were a Super Bowl team with Frank Reich. He leaves, and they fall apart. You look what Carson Wentz was with and without Frank Reich and under Doug Peterson. Night and day. You look at what the Eagles are this year after Doug Peterson left, a much better run team under Nick Sirianni, who nobody saw as a head coach candidate. Nick Sirianni was probably lower on the list than all those, young offensive minds we just named last year. Doug Peterson is a fraud, in my opinion. And if someone hires him, I'm going to criticize them for it. He needs to get back in the league as a coordinator first and show that he can bring something to the table, because he sure as hell is not this like elite culture guy. I know he wrote a book, but that doesn't make you an elite culture guy, Urban Meyer. So there's my top 10. And then as far as the openings go, I see 3 teams as surefire openings that are like guaranteed. Jacksonville and Las Vegas are obvious. Those coaches are already gone. And Chicago. I think Matt Nagy's run his course. I can't see him being back next year. So those 3 are for sure open. And then you have maybe opening Minnesota, Mike Zimmer, I think it's probably time to move on there, but you never know. He's a well-respected coach. They might make the playoffs. Might not be fired. Seattle with Pete Carroll, very well-spoken and very outspoken about that, how it's time to move on there. Carolina, I would fire Matt Rule. I just talked about this in the power rankings. If you want to see why, go check that out. But it's been a disaster, basically. And then Denver with Vic Fangio. It's just like, do you want a little more? Do you want an offensive guy? Something like that. Those are four that I think are maybe openings. And then like 2022 hot seat teams. Basically, like, these are teams that I think some fans will say, we need a new head coach. Whereas I just don't know if in reality they're going to fire their guy. New York Giants, I think they're stubborn and give Joe Judge a third year after another year of just really bad injuries, another year of Daniel Jones. I don't see them firing Joe Judge, even though I don't think he's the guy. Arizona with Cliff Kingsbury, I really don't think they fire him this year, but if they continue to lose bad the way they have and have an early playoff exit that's ugly, he's certainly going to be in the hot seat next year, and maybe they call like a Brian Dable or something and look to upgrade. And then Houston is, I'm impressed with some of the stuff they've done there, but I don't think anybody thinks David Culley is like a long-term head coach, so I think maybe after next year they look to upgrade there. Though Culley's done a decent job with what he's been asked to do, and he's older. He's like 65, 66. I think this was the plan, right? Just kind of come in, be a player-friendly guy, reset the culture, and then we'll move on in a couple years. The other team is Washington with Ron Rivera. Kind of a lost season with all the injuries there. He's, in general, exceeded expectations, but I do think he's a bit of a purgatory coach where, like, I don't think he's a defensive genius. He's a good defensive mind. Certainly not an offensive guy. And he's a really good CEO type, but I do think there's a certain ceiling with Ron Rivera that they may have hit. So maybe a 2022 hot seat there. But let's talk about the fits and basically, like, who I would hire if I were these teams. So starting with the Jacksonville Jaguars, I would hire Jim Caldwell, Nathaniel Hackett, and or Brian Dable. Jim Caldwell, as I mentioned, culture, resetting guy, comes in, players buy in. That might be what Jacksonville needs, is to just like, one of my favorite sayings that I learned from a college professor is, what's the first rule in the game of holes? Stop digging. And Jacksonville cannot stop digging holes, even though Urban Meyer is gone. That was the first step in stop digging. But if they hire a Doug Peterson or they try to roll the dice with a guy like Byron Leftwich, who might have no idea what he's doing in that situation especially, I think you're risking a lot. I think Jim Caldwell, he comes in. Maybe you can attract a Joe Brady, for example, to come and be your offensive mind under there. And you have something to build from. Jim Caldwell would be my number one choice if I was Jacksonville. Nathaniel Hackett I like because he's been around the league. He's been in Jacksonville. He's a familiar face. So he'll come in. It sounds weird, but like if you need a culture resetting guy, he'll come in. He'll know the field staff. He'll know the front office guys, a lot of them. He'll be a familiar face, and I love the scheme fit. Talk about the Shanahan offense with Trevor Lawrence being a perfect fit. You get guys like Laviska Shenault, Travis Etienne, who's a great wide zone runner. I think schematically speaking, Nathaniel Hackett makes a ton of sense for Jacksonville. Bring him home. And Brian Dable, of course. There's parallels between I don't know why I always want to call Lawrence Justin Herbert, but Lawrence and Josh Allen. There's parallels from the arm talent. Honestly, raw processing from Trevor Lawrence is what we're seeing right now. Parallels as far as lean into his ability as a vertical passer, open up Marvin Jones, open up DJ Shark if you can bring him back. So for Jacksonville, Jim Caldwell, Nathaniel Hackett, and Brian Dable would be great fits. For the Chicago Bears, there's going to be some crossover here, but I have Brian Dable 1, Eric Bieniemy 2, and Nathaniel Hackett 3. I don't think the Bears have this culture issue that like Jacksonville has. They have a clash of scheme and quarterback right now. So I think for all the reasons we described with Dable, Bieniemy, Hackett, these guys all could come in and put a better offensive scheme in place for Justin Fields to reach his potential, because that is what 2021 is all about for the Bears. You need to see Justin Fields play like a top 15 quarterback, really, to feel good at all about him. And I think those three coaches would be the best suited to achieve that. Las Vegas Raiders. Number one candidate here is actually not somebody that was on my top 10 list. I have Gus Bradley as my number one list. Now, they didn't make him the defensive, they didn't make him the head coach because I think mid-season they didn't want to mix things up. You see that. A lot of teams, when they fire their coach, they go to the special teams guy because he's familiar with everybody on the team for the most part, because everybody's got to play special teams, and you aren't distracting the offensive and defensive coordinators whose jobs just got harder. But with a full offseason to take a look at this thing, you could either go with an offensive mind, but I don't think you're going to attract like Brian Dable. I don't think there's enough. If this is a guy, Brian Dable, that turned down opportunities last year, I don't think the Raiders with Derek Carr and that unit with a bad offensive line, I don't think you're attracting Brian Dable. So yes, you could roll the dice with an offensive mind, which is why Eric Bieniemy is third on my list for the Raiders. But I think you have a decent setup with Greg Olsen as your offensive coordinator. He's done a good job for a long time now. You don't have to mix that up. Now, of course, it depends what you want to do with Derek Carr. If you want to blow this thing up, you would go a different route. But I'm assuming they want to stick with Derek Carr. So why not promote Gus Bradley, who did a great job with the Jacksonville Jaguars, who just had Blake Bortles as their quarterback. And even more importantly, he's done an unbelievable job for this Raiders defense. He really has. So you keep everything in place. You go Gus Bradley as your head coach next year, qualified for the job. He oversees the defense. And then Greg Olsen is your offensive coordinator, who's done a good job. Now, maybe you can get like a Caldwell, maybe, to step in, and you keep those two guys in place is another option. But the third guy on my list for the Raiders is like Matt Eberflus. But again, it doesn't make a ton of sense. Like, I don't think you go with another defensive mind when Gus Bradley's done such a good job for you. So they're in a tough spot. They're in a bit of a transition, but I say Gus Bradley, Matt Eberflus, who I love, might be an upgrade for that defense and a culture resetter, perhaps, and Eric Bieniemy, who you steal from the Chiefs and maybe open up the offense a little bit. Tough team for Las Vegas. Then the maybe openings. Spend a little bit less time on these, but just some ideas. The Minnesota Vikings are really interesting. So if they fire Zimmer, I would either go with an offensive mind in the Shanahan system, because Kirk Cousins very clearly is at his best when he can run that system. They can't move on from Kirk. They have too much guaranteed money, so Kirk will be your starter next year. Either go for a young offensive mind like Nathaniel Hackett or Kevin O'Connell from that Shanahan system, or roll the dice on a college coach. Either Luke Fickell or here's a fun one, PJ Fleck, who has done so much for the Minnesota Golden Gophers. Just exudes energy, an ascending name. I think keeping him in Minnesota could be really fun. Just a hot take there, but those would be my options. Luke Fickell, PJ Fleck, Kevin O'Connell, Nathaniel Hackett for the Vikes. Seattle, again, depending on what you do with Russ, but assuming you keep Russ and let Pete Carroll go, maybe Brian Dable could kick the tires on Russell Wilson. Or you could talk about a world where you're maybe in a transition away from Russ, whether that's this offseason or for the future, and try to get this defense back in shape with Matt Eberflus or Patrick Graham would be kind of my targets there. The Carolina Panthers, if they move on from Rule, that could be a culture resetting issue where you go with like Jim Caldwell or defensive guys like Dennis Allen and Matt Eberflus. Because again, I don't think you're attracting Dable, Bieniemy to work with Sam Darnold and one of the worst offensive lines in the NFL. I think you're best off finding a different offensive coordinator and a head coach that's just going to be a little more stable than Matt Rule. Now, if you could get Brian Dable, of course, you would love to get Brian Dable in Carolina, but I just don't know if he wants to go there. Denver, almost identical to Minnesota. So I have Luke Fickell, the Cincinnati Bearcats head coach. I did throw in like Kellen Moore if you want to roll the dice on one of these offensive minds. They're not necessarily as tied to the Shanahan scheme as Minnesota was. So Kellen Moore, Eric Bieniemy, any of those offensive minds, and Nathaniel Hackett for Denver. New York Giants, this one will be obvious for me. Promote Patrick Graham to head coach. He's going to get a job. I feel pretty good about that. Your scheme is in place. He turned down the Jets interview to stay in New York. That one would be obvious to me. Just say, bye-bye, Joe Judge. Patrick Graham, you're our guy. That would be a pretty seamless transition. Otherwise, Brian Dable in state, if you could attract him that way, maybe there's a quarterback he really likes. You have 2 top picks. Maybe he's got a new guy he gets to work with. Or Eric Bieniemy for the Giants. Arizona, again, they're not going to be open, so you're probably looking into like 2023, but I would love a Todd Bowles reunion in Arizona. I think they're lacking that physical mentality. You can't have much of a difference going from soft Cliff Kingsbury, to hard-ass, blitz-heavy Todd Bowles. And that defense could be lethal. They have the cornerbacks to run that system too. So, or at least that's the style of corners with speed and, yeah. Okay, also Matt Eberflus could bring some good defense to that team, or Brian Dable gets to work with Kyler Murray. I think that'd be highly appealing. Dable's also really creative with the quarterback run game too. I think he could lean into that. So if you want like the best fit for Brian Dable, like Arizona might be it, schematically speaking. Very similar build as far as the roster. And then the last team is the Houston Texans. Again, I think they bring their guy back, Coley, but they have a name there, Tim Kelly. Really talented, young offensive mind. Gets kind of swept under the rug because everything that's going on in Houston. But I see a pretty seamless transition there from Coley to Tim Kelly, whether it's next year or 2024. It's crazy to say. But I don't think Houston makes any drastic changes. They've got a long rebuild ahead. But I would not be surprised if Tim Kelly becomes their head coach someday. And there's your coaching carousel discussion. So we are going to wrap up by getting into the Patreon mailbag here. So again, the show here is brought to you by my Patreon. It's patreon.com/ThatFranchiseGuy. You'll support my show, you'll get exclusive content, and you get the ability to submit these mailbag questions that I answer on the show. And let's get into it. From Nick Christensen, I'm just going to adjust my position here just a little bit. From a pure football standpoint, how do you think Mike Vick would project into the league now? I think about this a lot. Like, how would older quarterbacks look nowadays? I mean, if Mike Vick got to play in like a Shanahan system, or imagine like if a team fully bought into like his abilities as a runner, like the Baltimore Ravens have with Lamar, like the league is just so much more open-minded offensively that I think undoubtedly Mike Vick would be at worst like right there with like Lamar Jackson. At best, he might be Patrick Mahomes. I don't know. But I think his career, assuming the dogfighting thing's a different discussion because that totally derailed his career. But yeah, I think Mike Vick in the modern league would be a top 5 quarterback. Then we got from Mr. Irrelevant. Now this is on December 13th, so we're going back a little bit. Some of these might be dated. Again, I was out of town, but if Jimmy G leads the Niners to a Super Bowl win this year, does that guarantee he starts there for another year? It's not going to happen. But in theory, if he did, I would say yes. They probably just keep him another year and just let Lance continue to develop. And still, Lance is still the future, but why mix things up? If that happened, it's not going to happen, but I would say that would be the only thing that buys him another year in San Francisco. But at the same time, his trade value would be at an all-time high, so who knows? From Adam, just wanted to know your thoughts on Nick Bosa winning Comeback Player of the Year. He's been awesome. I agree. Well deserving of it. But when you have 2 quarterbacks like Dak and Burrow, it's just, they're going to get it. It's a quarterback-driven league. But, yeah, he should be in the conversation, absolutely. I would say him. I'd probably go Burrow, Bosa, Dak, just if you want to look at, level of play. That's how I would rank it. From Devontae, if your whole defense had to be 11 of any one player, who would it be? Same for offense. I'd say Parsons for defense and Lamar for offense. I'd probably go, Parsons for defense is a no-brainer because he already plays every position. Derwin James might be a close second. And then I'd probably go Josh Allen for offense because you need to be able to block as well. And I think Josh Allen, just from a blocking perspective, gives you a chance because he's the biggest, freakiest player. He's a better quarterback than Lamar. And I think from Lamar would be a better receiver, obviously, but I think just blocking-wise, Josh Allen gives you the nod. I like that question, though. From Brandon, not a question, just wishing me a good wedding. Thank you, Brandon. Seriously, I was talking with Anna last night. Best night of my life, by far. Just unreal. Unbelievable. Such a great night, great feeling. Thank you for the support, Brandon. From Jaden, my co-host and I had a discussion on our podcast recently and had different opinions. Who do you think is better right now, and who do you think will be better moving forward? Burrow and Herbert. That's the big question of the year, right? Well, I feel like I answered that in the quarterback rankings, that I'm taking Burrow at this point. I have a better feeling about his consistency. You can revisit the quarterback rankings. I believe in Joe Burrow a little bit more than Herbert, but you're in good hands either way. From Keegan, if the 2021 draft was repicked, does Micah Parsons still fall to the Cowboys? No, absolutely not. Micah Parsons probably goes, the Dolphins. So the Dolphins traded up for Jalen Waddle. The Lions took Penei Sewell 7. The Panthers took J.C. Horn 8. And the Broncos took Pat Surtain 9th. He would go with one of those 4 picks. He would not still fall to the Cowboys at 12. I don't know necessarily who it would be. Probably either, 6, like maybe the Eagles. Dolphins deal plays out a little differently. I don't know exactly, but no. There's no way a player that good falls to 12 if you knew what you were going to get. From Patrick, could you explain the importance of pressures? Can you explain the importance of pressures as a metric to some degree? I understand why pressures are a good way of judging a pass rusher's performance, but what exactly does a pressure do to impact the game? So a pressure essentially means you are impacting the quarterback's drop back. And then you split it into pressures, hurries, hits, and sacks. So, pressures are split into hurries, hits, and sacks. So if you're hurrying the quarterback, You're quickening his release. You're making it so he can't complete his entire fundamentals of his footwork. You're speeding up his read. So you're forcing inaccurate throws and poor decisions, essentially. Or you're forcing the quarterback to scramble. If you hit the quarterback, not only are you doing those things, but you're potentially strip sacking or causing, you actually hitting the quarterback to lead to an inaccurate throw, potentially a turnover, tipped ball. And then, of course, sacks would be the last bit of that. So it's basically just expanding the sack statistics. There's tons of times where a pass rusher impacts the quarterback's drop back, and a lot of times that hurry will lead to an interception. But it just, in the past, it hasn't shown up in the stat sheet. So the more pressures, the more opportunities you have to force bad mistakes and create turnovers. From Tomsky, what is MVS doing on the hands team? Hey, MVS has had a great season, great pair of hands. I'd rather have him on the hands team than Alan Lazard this year. I've been impressed with Marquez Valdez-Scantling's development this year. Contract year, knock on wood, hasn't had really any drops. Had a hard time staying on the field. He's COVID and had dealing with an injury, but he's been the second best receiver for Green Bay when he's been called upon. From Hunt Boy, are you concerned that Jacksonville may take half measures since they've fired Meyer but not Balky? Yeah, I'm concerned about everything with Jacksonville. There's been continued reports about how big of a disaster it is. I don't think Trent Baalke is a particularly good GM. We'll see what they do. But yeah, in general, I'm just very concerned about Jacksonville. The coaches they've reported are the fact that they're even interested in Doug Peterson worries me. So they just have so much culture work to do. And yeah, I don't think they have the right GM in place either, even though Urban Meyer clearly had his hands on that thing. Mailbag question. How do you like my NFL overtime proposal? In a 15-minute overtime, there's a coin toss to determine who gets the ball first. The winner of the toss, Team A, starts at their own 25-yard line and tries to score. If they can't, the other team, Team B, starts at their own 25-yard line and tries to score. So that sounds very similar to mine. If Team B, loser of the coin toss, can't score, then the team that won the toss, Team A, gets the ball back at their own 25 and tries again in sudden death. If Team A scores a touchdown or field goal on the first drive, then Team B gets a chance to do the same. So that's very similar to what I've suggested. I've suggested 35-yard line instead of 25 because it'll speed things up a little bit. And you're doing the same thing that I say, where you get rid of punts, you get rid of kickoffs, which I just think in overtime, if you're going to sacrifice anything, because right now, half the time you're sacrificing the fact that one team's offense and one team's defense doesn't even see the field. So the people that are like, oh, special teams is a part of the game. Well, what happened to offense and defense? Because the way it's at right now, a whole 50% of the team doesn't even get tested half the time. So that's stupid to me. I think you get rid of kickoffs and punts because that's the best way to guarantee fair opportunity both ways. What you're suggesting is basically college overtime from the 25-yard line, which is fine. I like my idea where to speed things up, because I don't think you want all of these long drawn-out overtimes for player safety and all that stuff. I like my idea where if it's fourth down, you can either turn it over to them and they start where you started, concede that you couldn't score and now you'll test your defense, or you can say, you know what, we are going to try this fourth down. If we don't get it, you'll get the better field position. And that's, by the way, why you can't have kickoffs in overtime in a revised rule situation, because the team that kicks would have a pretty serious advantage because they get to basically determine the field position. If you don't, that was worded poorly. If you just say the second team can always answer, whether it's a touchdown or a field goal, the kicking team would then actually have a serious advantage, because if they just came out and got a stop, or they forced the team to go 3 and out and then they punt, well, then your possession actually starts at like the 40-yard line. So that's why I say get rid of kickoffs, get rid of punts, and go with my alternative. Yours is definitely not a bad solution. It just might take a little while because you're starting at the 25-yard line. But yeah, overtime rules gotta go. They gotta get updated. It's an offensive league, and the current format is from an era 50 years ago. It's just absurd the way they do overtime right now. Mailbag question from Snapshot. After watching my Titans lay an egg on offense and turning the ball over 4 times against the Steelers, I'm seeing that there are problems across the offense through a combination of ineffectiveness and injuries. So what should the Titans prioritize fixing in the offseason? Get a better QB with upside, patch the O-line, find a quality number 2 because Julio can't play, get an all-purpose tight end. Yeah, I mean, the Titans, I like the Titans offense. Now, I don't think you have to move on from Tannehill. It's going to be really hard for them, especially in this draft class, to find an upgrade. So I don't think this offseason you move on from Tannehill. I would say that, the O-line isn't perfect, but it's good enough. I would look at the playmakers and say, yeah, Julio, you were counting on him to be your number 2, and you need a better option there, I would say. And yes, an all-purpose tight end could work, but they scheme up the tight ends pretty well. Honestly, the Titans just got to get healthy. It's a cop-out answer, but they need a number 2 receiver for sure, but they've just been derailed by injuries. So I'm not terribly worried about them. It's just with Tannehill, what's your upside, From Nicholas Craig, what head coaches do you think will be fired? Okay, we already did that. Thanks for the question, though, Nick. From Brandon, just wanted to take a second to congratulate on the wedding. Not a honeymoon or not a mailbag question, but thank you, Brandon. Appreciate you as always. Brandon Cosby, long-term Patreon supporter, so shout out. From Tyler, do you think an offensive strategy utilizing heavy personnel could be viable to combat modern defenses? I mean, we're totally seeing that right now. The league zigs and zags constantly, and we've seen this kind of return to the run game in a lot of ways. Most offenses actually are doing a lot of that right now. Packers, Colts, Titans, Ravens. If you just go down the playoff teams, half of them love 12 personnel. They love 13 personnel. They love to just come out in heavy packages and force you to stop the run. It's how the league works, right? Like, basically, if you want the rundown, Seattle takes the league by storm with cover 3 defense. The whole league shifts to cover 3. So the Shanahan offense, explicitly designed to put safeties in a bind with double crossing routes, because you can't cover both, the Shanahan offense explodes onto the scene. Right? Well, what's the adjustment to that? Cover 2, cover 4, man-to-man. Drop off, go, 2 high shells. So we see way less cover 3, now we see quarters. Well, what happens when you run quarters defense? You're inviting teams to run the ball. Inversely, we're also seeing way more nickel, due in a lot of ways to the Seattle 3 defense, with Cam Chancellor changing the game, this concept of a dime linebacker. There's a lot of things that have said, okay, now you can get back to heavy personnel and beat teams that way. It's totally going that way. So your suggestion, it's something we're seeing. Absolutely. And it is effective. So yeah, it's a trend in the league right now. It's like the return of the run game. From BMO Grim, is there any feasible way to fix the Pro Bowl and all Pro Bowl selections? Right now it's just a popularity contest. I mean, you could just do what they do for All Pro and just give sports writers votes. That's probably the best way to do it, is just go to the sports writers, pick 50 of the best blue check sports analysts. It's better than the current system, that's for sure. From Mills, the mailbag question is, how are you and the newlywed wife doing? And how is the honeymoon? Thank you for asking. We are doing amazing. Married life is great. Honeymoon in Mexico was spectacular. Great food, perfect weather, just happiness across the board. So thank you for asking, Mills. Okay, we got 4 more questions here from Tanner. A bit of a fun question, but if you could pick any 2 QBs from any point in NFL history and see them square off in the Super Bowl, who would it be? For me, Packers versus Dolphins, Rodgers versus Marino would be fantastic. I feel like I'd want to, just selfishly, I'd want to see like Montana or Marino. I'll go Marino. I feel like I don't know enough about Marino, so I'll go Marino. Everyone says he was like the best of the oldies. And how about Marino and Mahomes? Just the old versus the new. But I wish there was some way to like see that. Like if I had 3 wishes, just see like, you know, like the LeBron, Michael Jordan debate, like all the oldies versus the newies. It's always like some of the best hypotheticals. From Josh, where does Kelsey's route running rank in terms of all wide receivers? Just seems like he's always open. His route running is a little different because he's like an IQ route runner, I guess. Like he's got quickness, but he is 250 pounds, right? So he's not as good of a route runner as like Adams or Diggs or a lot of these top receivers. But what he has is like a rare ability to find soft spots in zones, and he's also maybe the best reactionary receiver to when Mahomes breaks the pocket. Like his timing is almost like him and Mahomes are like linked up. Like when Mahomes decides I'm breaking the play, Kelsey almost always like changes his direction and finds the soft spot or works back to Mahomes. That's a truly unique ability with Kelsey. Now, he has rare route running for a tight end, which is incredibly valuable. Like you can line him up at wide receiver and he's a legit separator at the position. But it's like, I don't know, 30th, 40th. I wouldn't say he's like a top 10 route runner, just in a typical sense. From Luke, what's happening with Zach Wilson? It doesn't seem like he's doing the same things at BYU, like holding off DBs and processing quickly. Should we be concerned? Yeah, he's had a concerning season, just like all these rookie quarterbacks have. He's definitely has not been as good as he was at BYU. That's undoubtedly. But I'm not going to concern about any of these rookie quarterbacks until next year. I think we got spoiled a little bit with Herbert and Burrow last year, just kind of coming onto the scene immediately. But, you know, you go back to like Josh Allen's rookie year. Lamar Jackson's rookie year wasn't good. Kyler's was pretty dang good, but you know, most quarterbacks don't come in and ball out right away. So I'm not going to worry. They need to continue like finding the right plays that work and getting the scheme working and all that stuff. I think you're disappointed, but maybe not concerned, I suppose, is where I'm at with Zach Wilson, as I am with all these quarterbacks. From Alex, last question. If you're the owner of the Jags, who would be the coach you hire for Trevor? Well, we did that, so we are all done. Great show. Really fun recording that one. It's good to be back with the podcast. Make sure you guys subscribe because we've got draft content coming. We've got playoff predictions coming. Please do hit that like button. Check out my Patreon if you want to support the show. And that's all I got. I appreciate you guys for watching so much, and we'll see you later. Peace out.